This hearing will come to order. Today, the Senate Judiciary Committee will hold a hearing on the nominations of Kristen Clarke to be Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division and Todd Kemp to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division, commonly referred to as ENRD. These are key positions in the Department of Justice, but once confirmed, these nominees will play a critical role working with Attorney General Garland and other senior department leaders to restore the department's independence and integrity, take partisan politics out of the department's work, and faithfully execute the law. Ms. Clarke, Mr. Kemp, you're so far away, but I wanted to welcome you and your families especially. We're happy to have you here today. With passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Division was founded with the task of defending the civil rights of all Americans. The division's attorneys' work is wide-ranging and includes protecting the right to vote, defending the free exercise of religion, combating human trafficking, ensuring those with disabilities have equal opportunities and access to public accommodations, and upholding fair housing laws, rooting out employment discrimination, protecting students against educational integrity. It's a pretty vast agenda. Importantly, the division's lawyers also investigate and prosecute hate crimes, which occur far too frequently in our communities. They are perpetrated against individuals on the basis of race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability. The Civil Rights Division plays a critical role in the Justice Department, building on the mission that led the Justice Department's creation in the late 19th century, upholding equal justice under the law. But the Civil Rights Division today also is regrettably a shell of its former self. The Trump administration did more than just diminish the division's standing. It went so far as to use the division to roll back hard-won civil rights. Under President Trump, the Civil Rights Division reversed long-standing positions in key voting rights cases. It gave its blessing to harmful voter ID laws that were unnecessary and voter purges. The division pushed for and then defended the addition of citizenship questions in the 2020 census. It abandoned the use of consent decrees with local police departments, a vital tool that helped promote police accountability and protect both officers and the communities they served. And so, after 4 years of a Civil Rights Division hollowed out by the Justice Department's own leaders, we find ourselves in desperate need of restored leadership, of a bold vision for returning the division to its founding ideals, of a renewed commitment to enforcing the nation's civil rights laws. And fortunately, in Kristen Clarke, we have exactly the kind of leader who can accomplish this ambitious mission. Ms. Clarke is currently the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, an organization founded at the urging of President John Kennedy, championed by his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. In her role leading the Lawyers Committee, and indeed throughout her career, Ms. Clarke has been a strong defender of civil rights. From prosecuting hate crimes and human trafficking in the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division, to protecting voting rights at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, to tackling employment discrimination as the Chief of Civil Rights Bureau in the New York Attorney General's office, Ms. Clarke has steadfastly pursued an objective that sadly remains elusive even to this day: equal justice for all. And in that pursuit, she has exhibited the qualities that we need in the individual charged with running the Civil Rights Division: humility, fidelity to the rule of law, and a demonstrated commitment to building broad coalitions in support of civil rights. Sadly, some are so threatened by the prospect of a revitalized Civil Rights Division that they have already engaged in baseless attacks on this extremely well-qualified nominee. This morning's Washington Post tells of many of those attacks which you have disclosed to the public in an effort to let them know exactly what you have faced. Despite Clarke's deep base of law enforcement support, groups like the Major Cities Chiefs Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, to individual sheriffs, prosecutors, and state attorneys general, some are actually trying to paint her as anti-police. based on false accusations that she represented or worked to free a man convicted of murdering a Philadelphia officer. And despite years of confronting online anti-Semitic hate and work defending religious rights, including the right of workers to receive accommodations to observe the Saturday Sabbath, Clarke is facing accusations of anti-Semitism, which are so absurd that the Jewish Council for Public Affairs felt the need to write to this committee and say that the organization, quote, considers attempts to focus on purported anti-Semitism during Clarke's nomination process to be inappropriate. Attorney General Garland told us during his own hearing that he does not believe Clarke is an anti-Semite or believes she is discriminatory in any sense. Clarke is the person the Attorney General wants us to send him to lead to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. She is the person who can restore the Civil Rights Division to serve all of the American people. For the past several weeks, stories about the trial in Minnesota and incidents there and in other states have led the news. It's our job in the Senate Judiciary Committee to remind America that there is a rule of law and a legal process to protect the civil rights of all Americans. Speech and nonviolent demonstration are protected constitutional actions in America. I hope we can show by our actions in this committee that we can lead the proper legal response to the civil rights issues of our day. We'll also hear today from Todd Kim, who likewise brings with him an amazing wealth of experience and commitment to the law, irrespective of personal belief or partisan politics. In a conversation I had with Mr. Kim, I talked about the fact that so many trial lawyers these days really can't point to any appearances before judges. You have an extraordinary record, particularly on the appellate level when it comes to that. The Environment and Natural Resources Division, originally created as the Public Lands Division, has been in existence for over 100 years. Every day, attorneys in this division work tirelessly to enforce our nation's environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and hazardous waste laws. Every American benefits from ENRD's work to reduce pollution and protect our nation's most precious natural resources. Sadly, ENRD was gutted under the Trump administration. Over the past 4 years, the number of enforcement actions against polluters dropped dramatically, and civil penalties fell to an all-time low. The prior Assistant Attorney General, Jeffrey Bozzard Clarke, focused on politics and a deeply partisan agenda, not the law. He prioritized allowing polluters to act with impunity, not protecting the environment. And then, as acting head of the Civil Division, Clarke, it was reported, conspired with Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Disgraceful conduct, which this committee is actively investigating. What ENRD needs now is someone who will bring back integrity, stability, and a renewed commitment to enforcing our nation's environmental and natural resource laws. Todd Kim is that person. Mr. Kim is currently the Deputy General Counsel for Litigation, Regulation, and Enforcement at the Department of Energy. He is an experienced, award-winning appellate litigator. He has significant expertise in environmental and natural resources law from 8 years at ENRD, and he served for 11 years as the District of Columbia's first Solicitor General. Whether representing the U.S. government under Clinton and Bush administrations, the D.C. government, or clients in private practice, Mr. Kim is focused on the law, not politics. Throughout his career, Mr. Kim has been recognized for his integrity, his humility, his deep knowledge base, and his understanding of what it means to serve as an officer of the court and representing the people of the United States. He has all the qualities this nation needs to lead the Environment and Natural Resources Division. Now I'd like to turn to the ranking member, Senator Grassley of Iowa.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be here to ask these nominees some questions. Top positions in the Department of Justice: Kristen Clarke to be Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division; Todd Kim to be Assistant Attorney General for Environment and Natural Resources. And I thank each of them because they both spent considerable time on the phone with me. One recently is Monday and the other one a couple, 3 weeks ago, I guess. As I've said before, I hope that Judge Garland meant it when he said he wants to keep politics out of the Justice Department. I'd like to see a real commitment to do that from the nominees today. I don't want to see a return to the Holder days, but I worry about that being down the road. Just give you a recent example. The Justice Department has the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in its prestigious Office of Legal Counsel, and he was recently tweeting criticism of the Supreme Court's opinions, giving his views on Republican political prospects and voter integrity legislation. That's senior management in the departments, and it happens to be what's supposed to be the most apolitical division. So this person was moonlighting as a political pundit. I see that, and it makes me wonder about the judgment and impartiality of the Justice Department's political leadership. I hope that Judge Garland will get his house in order. We'll see if today's nominees agree with that assessment. So now turning to the nominees, and I think that, none of us mince words around the United States Senate. I know that Ms. Clarke knows that she's very controversial. That said, I do appreciate the conversation she and I had, and I want to commend her for being forthcoming with the committee. I don't doubt that Ms. Clarke is a capable attorney who is sincerely committed to progressive causes. What I'm going to want to see is whether she can put that partisan commitment aside and do the work of an apolitical civil rights enforcer. For example, just last summer, she wrote a piece called, quote, unquote, I prosecuted police killings, defund the police, but be strategic, end of quote. I'm sure that we'll hear the usual refrain today that nominees don't really mean it when they say defund the police, but the fact is, it was said. Is Ms. Clarke going to use her perch in the Civil Rights Division to strategically defund the police by other means? Ms. Clarke has taken positions on religious liberty that are, I believe, limited and potentially unfair to believers. Will she put these views aside and enforce the rights of believers to the extent mandated by the courts? Ms. Clarke is a strong believer in voting rights, so am I, but I'm also a strong believer in secure elections. So I think it's a legitimate question whether she continued to view efforts to secure our elections as voter suppression when she's in charge of enforcing our voter laws, particularly a voter suppression talked about now when we had such a historical turnout for both the loser of the election as well as the winner of the election. Like Ms. Gupta before her, Ms. Clarke has launched many personal attacks on federal judges, especially Kavanaugh. Chairman Durbin has in the past compared this practice to Senator Ashcroft and Sessions opposing judicial nominees. I happen to think it's a little bit different. Evaluating judicial nominees is part of our constitutional duty. I think it's different for litigators and aspiring government lawyers to go around attacking federal judges and doing it publicly. Questioning the integrity of judges and then eagerly appearing before them means that you either aren't looking out for your client's best interest or that you didn't really mean your attack to begin with. Now, I think Mr. Kim is a lot less controversial, nominated to run the Environment and Natural Resources Division. While it's still called that, he has a distinguished career as a courtroom advocate. I don't think I agree with him on much politically, but elections have consequences, and based on his record, I think he will enforce the rule of law in the Justice Department. I will say that some of the activities of the Justice Department implicating his division do concern me. At policy level, President Biden wants to shift its focus from enforcing laws as passed by this Congress to protecting so-called, quote-unquote, environmental justice. I don't think this is consistent with the depoliticalized Justice Department that Judge Garland promised us. So I hope Mr. Kim will push back on any instructions to go forward beyond what the law requires. The Biden Justice Department is also in an unprecedented practice of acceding to nationwide injunctions against environmental rules in lower courts. I think this is an attack on the rule of law and the Administrative Procedures Act. President Biden is entitled to change environmental rules consistent with statute, but he should do it through the rulemaking process and not through litigation tricks. I hope that Mr. Kim will push back on this as well. Regulation by California judge can become regulation by Texas judge before you know it. With that, I welcome the opportunity to ask questions.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. At this point, we're going to have the formal introductions of our the two nominees. And first, colleague Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is going to join us remotely to introduce Ms. Clarke. Senator Gillibrand, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley and members of the Judiciary Committee. It's my honor to join you today to introduce Kristen Clarke, nominee for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. At this moment in time, when we are seeing an unprecedented assault on voting rights, a horrifying rise in bigotry, racism, and anti-Semitism, and a growing national conversation on criminal justice, it could not be more important for the Civil Rights Division to have a leader with the experience and qualifications to begin addressing these challenges from day one. Ms. Clarke is that leader. She is the right person for this job at this moment. Ms. Clarke first became interested in civil rights law on a high school field trip to watch the arguments in Sheff versus O'Neill, a Connecticut school desegregation case. And she has spent her entire professional life in public service working in virtually every area of civil rights. Her career began in the DOJ honors program as a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division during the Bush administration, where she served for nearly 6 years. If confirmed, Ms. Clarke would return to the division as the first woman and the only the fourth Black leader confirmed in its 64-year history. Throughout her career, she has litigated voting rights cases at NAACP Legal Defense Fund, led the New York Attorney General's Civil Rights Bureau, served as the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, one of the nation's oldest civil rights legal organizations. Ms. Clarke has experience standing up to hate. She has led a team that won the $700,000 verdict against the neo-Nazi website Daily Stormer over its harassment campaign targeting the first Black female student body president of American University. And she has worked closely with the families of Emmett Till, Matthew Shepard, James Byrd, Heather Heyer, and more. She's experienced protecting religious minorities. As the chief of the New York State Civil Rights Bureau, she led the unit that fought religious discrimination and defended Jewish employees' right to observe their faith. She has had experience protecting voting rights. She has become one of the nation's leading voting rights lawyers representing voters in the Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder case before it reached the Supreme Court, and working on the 2006 bipartisan reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. Ms. Clarke has also worked to ensure the families and vulnerable communities have access to fair housing opportunities, to protect the rights of people with disabilities, and to obtain justice for women in the workplace, winning a $3.8 million settlement for close to 300 women in gender discrimination and sexual harassment case against Con Edison. And she's worked to build bridges between the legal and law enforcement communities. She's worked directly with hundreds of the nation's leading law firms, thousands of lawyers, the FBI, ATF, and law enforcement agencies on hate crimes, human trafficking, and domestic violence cases. She partnered with New York sheriffs to institute best practices for working with communities with limited English proficiency. She conducted a training with the National Sheriff's Association on community policing and rebuilding trust. And she worked with the International Association of Police Chiefs to develop strategies to enhance officers' response to hate crimes and incidents, which have since been adopted by police forces across the globe. Results of her collaborative work are reflected in the support for her nomination from law enforcement, including the Major Cities Chief Association, NOBLE, and IACP Executive Director Vincent Tellucci. Her unparalleled legal credentials are complemented by her lived experience. She grew up in Brooklyn's Sterrett City Housing Development, the daughter of Jamaican immigrants who instilled in her an unmatched work ethic.
Yes, I do.
Her determination and hard work in public school opened the doors to Choate Rosemary Hall, Harvard, and Columbia Law School. Seeing the stark difference in access to opportunity in her Brooklyn neighborhood and in those private schools gave her the valuable perspective on inequity that comes to guide her work to this day. If confirmed, Ms. Clarke will bring the knowledge, experience, and leadership the Civil Rights Division needs to meet the challenges that lie ahead and, as she has said, to make the promise of justice for all a reality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Gillibrand. We appreciate your appearance before the committee and introduction of Ms. Clarke. Now the formal introduction of Mr. Kim will be led by our colleague Cory Booker. And I might add that we, with unanimous consent, will also enter a letter from Delegate Eller and Holmes Norton in support of Mr. Kim as well. Senator Booker.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm sorry I don't have the privilege of introducing both of these extraordinary candidates. Kristen Clarke is not only a friend, but someone that I've long worked with and admired. But I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce Todd Kim, and it is a thrill to do so. Now, before I say anything about Mr. Kim's incredible legal career and record of public service, I should start with perhaps one of the most important distinguishing features about him. He is from New Jersey and born in Edison, and like me, grew up in the great Garden State. And I am proud to be introducing him. He is a child of immigrants who first came to the country as his parents as graduate students. Mr. Kim's father went on as a research chemist, while his mother directed choirs for several local Korean American churches. Now, he unfortunately did not go to Stanford or Yale, but he went to an okay college for undergraduate, Harvard, and again, didn't go to Yale Law School, but went to Harvard Law. We'll forgive him for that, but there he excelled. He was the executive editor of the Harvard Law Review, Mr. King, and then soon Mr. Kim became a really skilled environmental litigator. He spent 8 years at the Justice Department's Environment and Natural Resources Division, serving as nonpartisan career attorney in both the Clinton and the Bush administrations. Now, Mr. Kim has been nominated to return to that same division, and this time to lead it. The Environment and Natural Resources Division is a key, if not critical, part of the Justice Department. You cannot have justice without environmental justice. But also, he is intending, I believe, the critical effort to revitalize our environmental policy. The division he will lead enforces our foundational environmental laws to ensure that we breathe clean air, that we drink clean water, and that we're protected from hazardous wastes. I've visited around this country and seen the urgencies of environmental justice and the work still to do. He will help ensure not only do people have environmental justice, but that our public lands are properly managed, that our wildlife is protected, and that our tribal land rights are respected. So many of our communities face environmental threat that are also public health crises. These are often communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities, people who often wonder who is standing up to fight for them. The single biggest factor today in America that determines whether someone lives near a toxic waste site is the color of their skin. When the Environment and Natural Resources Division pursues a case and enforces our environmental laws, it is playing a vital role in protecting the well-beings of communities across this country. If Mr. Kim is confirmed, he will be ready to lead the division on day one with experience and conviction to affirm the ideals of our nation. In addition to his environmental expertise, though, Mr. Kim also served for more than a decade as DC's Solicitor General. He oversaw and argued key constitutional and regulatory appeals for the district, including 3 before the U.S. Supreme Court. All in all, Mr. Kim has been the lead counsel on hundreds of appeals. He's argued before the Supreme Court, all 13 federal courts of appeals, DC's highest court, and state appellate courts. And since the beginning of this year, Mr. Kim has served as Deputy General Counsel at the Energy Department. If he's confirmed to lead the Environment and Natural Resources Division, I believe Mr. Kim will bring a breadth of experience in the environmental and legal issues that the division's lawyers confront every single day. But crucially, he will also bring an unassailable established record of advocating on behalf of the American people and not any particular political interest or personal interest. He has a life record of pursuing justice. I'm confident that Mr. Kim, along with President Biden's other nominees, including Kristen Clarke, will play a pivotal role in restoring the independence and integrity of the Justice Department. And for many people who have lost hope, who suffer illness and disease and poisoning, I believe he will be a champion for those people so that they too can appreciate what should be an American birthright: access to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Booker. I'd like to ask the 2 nominees to stand and be sworn. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm or swear that the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Let the record show that both nominees answered in the affirmative. And now it's time for your opening statements. We'll start with Ms. Clarke.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand, for your warm words of introduction. Before I begin, Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Grassley, I would like to take a brief moment to recognize my son, Miles, my mother, and my partner who are with me today. I am grateful for their love and support. My journey to this hearing room today may not be an obvious one. It started my junior year of high school when a teacher loaded my classmates and me into a van and drove us to a courthouse in Hartford, Connecticut, to hear arguments in what turned out to be a landmark school desegregation case, Sheff versus O'Neill. As the daughter of Jamaican immigrants growing up humbly in Starrett City, the nation's largest public housing complex in Brooklyn, New York, I'd never been inside a courtroom before. That moment was a powerful display of the role that civil rights lawyers play in our society. I was mesmerized and deeply moved as I watched attorneys argue for more just and equitable educational opportunities. From that moment on, I knew I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I worked hard in public school. My efforts yielded some lucky breaks that included a seat in a program called Prep for Prep that led me to attend a prep school called Choate Rosemary Hall. And that trajectory-changing program is why I ended up in that van that day, headed to that courthouse. And then it led to Harvard and Columbia Law School. I turned down high-paying corporate law firms to take my dream job in the Justice Department's Attorney General's Honors Program, where I served for 6 years, primarily during the George W. Bush administration. As a DOJ attorney, I began my legal career traveling across the country to communities like Tensas Parish, Louisiana, and Clarksdale, Mississippi. I learned to be a lawyer's lawyer, to focus on the rule of law and let the facts lead where they may. When I left DOJ, I carried the words of the late Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall as my guide. Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out. because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on. I've tried to do just that at every step of my career, from the Voting Rights Project at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to the Civil Rights Bureau in the New York State Attorney General's office, where I was the state's top civil rights enforcement officer. And since 2015, I've led the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, one of the nation's leading civil rights legal organizations. Formed at the request of John F. Kennedy in 1963, the Lawyers Committee activated the private bar to help ensure the rule of law during the turbulence of the civil rights movement. I've worked with thousands of lawyers at major corporate law firms across the country who bring to bear the resources of their firms to advance people's rights. Our nation is a healthier place when we respect the rights of all communities. In every role I've held, I've worked with and for people of all backgrounds, regardless of race, national origin, religion, or disability status. I've listened deeply to all sides of debates, regardless of political affiliation. There is no substitute to listening and learning in this work, and I pledge to you that I will bring that to the role if confirmed. I would also bring to my stewardship of the Civil Rights Division the lessons I've learned over my 20 years as a civil rights attorney, lessons from the people impacted by my work, lessons from the wise attorneys who've mentored me, and lessons from being a single mother juggling the demands of this work. But perhaps most important would be the fulfillment of the promise I made to myself as a 16-year-old girl in that Connecticut courthouse. As I look at my own son, now the same age I was when I entered that Connecticut courtroom, I remain committed to the promise of working every day to build a world of equal opportunity for all, a world where no 16-year-old is the target of hateful language, a world where no young man is racially profiled. I dream of a world that values his mind, his heart, and his exceptional soccer skills, and does not push him aside because of the color of his skin. I dream of that for every child in America. As the head of the Civil Rights Division, I will bring the same clear-eyed pursuit of justice that has guided me my entire life. I would be honored for you to grant me this humbling opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. And as a mother, I think the reference to your son's soccer skills was probably the most important part of your opening statement. Thank you very much. Mr. Kim.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before you today for this hearing to consider my nomination to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division at the Department of Justice. Thank you, Senator Booker, for your generous introduction. I thank President Biden and Attorney General Garland for this opportunity to return to the department where I began my legal career. And most of all, let me thank my family. My wife, Carolyn, and my sons, Paulden and Jigme, are here with me today. Watching from afar are my sister Sana and my parents, Changjung Kim and Suki Yu. I'm incredibly grateful and incredibly lucky to have all of them in my life. In the 1960s, my parents were Korean immigrants who came to the United States to pursue graduate degrees. They both chose Big Ten schools. My mom, the University of Minnesota, my dad, Purdue. They met here, settled here, had my big sister in Indiana and then me in New Jersey, and eventually became proud US citizens. Their hard work and fundamental decency have been at the root of any success I've ever had, and will always be a model for what I'd like to show my own children. In 1984, my parents took the family on a classic RV trip to the American West. I was 11 years old, and the trip made a big impact on me. The grandeur and beauty of Yellowstone, Grand Teton, Arches, Mesa Verde, every park visit testified to the need to preserve our nation's treasures for future generations. As I grew older, I learned more about the rule of law and about the role of the government in promoting the public good. And I learned more about how the pollution laws are supposed to protect the health and welfare of all of us, including every community in America. I grew to realize that my calling was public service, to protect our shared interest in the environment and our natural resources. And the best way for me to contribute to that effort was as a lawyer, making sure the country's environmental laws are followed and enforced. After graduating from law school and clerking for the Honorable Judith Rogers of the DC Circuit, I applied to join the Department of Justice through its honors program and asked to be assigned to the Environment and Natural Resources Division. I grew up as a lawyer at ENRD, working on cases involving the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Superfund site cleanup, Native American land rights, the establishment of national monuments, and more. I worked on cases around the country in the Supreme Court and every federal circuit, civil and criminal enforcement matters against corporations and individuals, as well as defenses of agency actions against challenges of all sorts. In my 7.5 years there, I also learned firsthand the skill, dedication, professionalism, and integrity of the career staff that work day in and day out enforcing environmental laws for the good of the American people. I loved my job, and frankly, I thought I would never leave the division, but I was unexpectedly offered another opportunity to do public service. This time, it was the chance to serve as the first Solicitor General for my adopted home, the District of Columbia. As Solicitor General, I would be the chief appellate lawyer representing the people of the district. I couldn't turn it down. I am at heart a government lawyer, and it was an honor and a privilege to serve my community for more than 11 years. But I always hoped that someday I'd have the chance to return to the department and to ENRD. I am so thankful to have that opportunity today. I know that this is a crucial moment for the division and the nation, with the pressing imperatives of enforcing the nation's environmental laws with integrity, defending federal agencies, honoring the United States' important relationship with Native American Indian tribes, promoting the effective stewardship of public lands and national resources, and addressing climate change and environmental justice. The cliche for me is real. I want to leave the world and the country a better place for my kids. I am deeply honored to have a chance to do that, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Before turning to my questions, I'll lay out a few of the mechanics we'll follow in this hearing. Senators will have 5 minutes to question nominees. We'll work right through questioning without any breaks. Let me make one more note before we get started. When we last held a nominations hearing, I asked my colleagues to be respectful in questioning their nominees, and they certainly obliged. I greatly appreciate that. If nothing else, that approach led to a more productive hearing, one in which the committee came away with a sense of the nominees' qualifications and vision for their roles. And so I'll again make that request to my colleagues, and I'm sure that they will follow it. So let me turn to questions. I'll start with Ms. Clarke. Yesterday was a classic illustration of where we are in America on a very important issue. Yesterday, like many days before, we are following on a day-to-day basis a trial in Minnesota. And the outcome of that trial is, of course, a topic of great concern for all Americans, black, white, and brown. The question is whether there was police misconduct involved in the death of George Floyd. And on top of that came the killing of Daunte Wright in Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis. I don't want to pick on Senator Klobuchar's state because sadly there are cases like that in many states, including my own. And a real question as to the training and fitness of some people in law enforcement. At the same time yesterday, we had a memorial service for one of our Capitol Hill policemen who was killed in the line of duty on Good Friday. He was standing out at an entrance which many of us use every single day, and a man came up and hit him with a car and killed him. And yesterday, he was honored, his body lie in repose in the rotunda, and the President of the United States came to give his honor and respect to Officer Billy Evans. What a contrast, the trial in Minneapolis and the memorial service at our nation's capital. Ms. Clarke, that really calls into question what you're really asking to embark on here, trying to find the right balance with civil rights in this country, representing or respecting our constitutional rights and civil rights, but understanding as well that an organized society needs law enforcement. You know that this Newsweek article is going to be presented to you to explain, and I'm going to give you that chance too. I know you've been a prosecutor. You've represented the people of the United States of America in lawsuits. You've been actively engaged in that effort for years. Questions were raised in this article about so-called defunding the police. And I want to give you a chance to explain what you were saying in that article. I certainly agree with some of your suggestions. We do need more social workers. They're a necessary part of law enforcement as far as I'm concerned, can avoid a lot of deadly confrontations. Yes, we need more social support in schools. That goes without saying. I think that's the right thing to do. More money in mental health aid as well. And I question, as others do, sending all this military equipment to police departments. But I want to give you a chance to explain that article and your position in your own words.
Thank you for the question, Senator. First, I want to acknowledge the grief that I know that families and communities are experiencing today. The family of the grieving Capitol officer who lost his life, the family of George Floyd, and so many others. I think we are at an inflection point. Senator, throughout my career, I have worked with law enforcement. I started off my career in the Justice Department and spent several years in the criminal section working with the FBI. Throughout my career, I have endeavored to form partnerships with law enforcement. Most recently, I worked with the International Association of Chiefs of Police to develop more effective strategies for tackling hate crimes. I'm proud to sit here today with the endorsement of a number of law enforcement organizations, the National Association of Police Organizations, the Major Cities Chiefs, the head of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officers, and more. And I can assure this committee that if confirmed, I will bring the long experience that I have of working to find common ground with law enforcement to this role. The article that you referenced, Senator, I wrote to make clear that I do not support defunding the police. I do support finding strategies to ensure that law enforcement can carry out their jobs more safely and effectively, and channeling resources to emotional health treatment and other severely under-resourced areas, I think, is one path forward. I know that this committee engages in robust bipartisan dialogue around criminal justice reform frequently, and I look forward to being a partner in those ongoing efforts and discussions.
Do you think our police need to invest more money in training and in screening recruits to make certain that those who are not ready for the job, not prepared for it, or bring some prejudice to it are excluded?
I support Senator President Biden's commitment of $300 million to cops to help ensure that police have more resources to do their jobs. I understand the jobs that they have are incredibly difficult, and with more resources, we can work to ensure that they can carry out their roles more effectively.
Thank you. Senator Grassley.
My first question was going to be about defunding police, but you have addressed that already, but I think I would disagree with you whether or not you have advocated defunding police, so I'll go on to my second question. Now, you might think it's unfair to bring up something that you organized in law school, but yesterday there was a congresswoman who said things along the same line. At a conference that featured a number of speakers that called violent radicals, including numerous cop killers, political prisoners, and POWs. So I got the name of 3 cop killers, 2 in prison, 1 fleeing to Cuba: Asada Shakur, Tom Manning, Mumia Abu Jamal. My question to you is, do you consider them political prisoners?
No, I am not familiar with there are cases I've never worked on those matters. The conference that you're referring to, Senator, was organized by the late Dr. Manning Marable, who was the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies. I was not the organizer of that conference, but I provided logistical support as a student at that time.
You have said, quote, "It's time to restore both race and gender diversity to our federal courts." Yet, Democrats in the Senate consistently voted against President Trump's female and minority nominees, especially at the circuit court level. You also didn't support many of these nominees. So my question, pretty simple. When Democrats opposed minority or female nominees who were rated qualified by the ABA, were they being racist and sexist?
Thank you, Senator. Over the 4 years of President Trump's tenure, my organization only took positions on about 5 judicial nominees, 3 of them Supreme Court justices. I believe that race and gender diversity on our nation's court is an important priority and goal that we should work towards.
So is it possible in the same vein, then, for Republicans to oppose President Biden's nominees on ideological grounds without being racist or sexist?
I believe that this body has an incredibly important advise and consent role under the Constitution to vet nominees. We want nominees who are qualified, but we also want to work to ensure that the bench reflects the growing diversity of our country. People with disabilities, women, people of color, are all people who we should see reflected on our nation's federal courts.
Can I ask you to be specific, though? If Democrats can oppose it and not be racist or sexist, shouldn't you have the same standard for Republicans?
I do not view this work through a partisan lens, Senator. In looking at judicial nominees, I look at qualifications. I've spoken about the need for diversity, but I don't view these issues at all through a partisan lens, Senator.
In 2017, you tweeted an article by Judge William Pryor, who at that time was opposing a proposed court expansion plan. You said, quote, "The Senate should heed his call," end quote, and not expand the courts. Do you still oppose expanding the number of judges? If not, why not?
I understand that President Biden has convened a commission to look closely at these questions. I think that these are important questions that we should examine and look forward to seeing the results of that commission's work.
I believe, though, that the conversations you had indirectly with Pryor did not deal with the number of Supreme Court judges or packing the court, but with lower court judges. So at that time, you seemed to say that we should not be expanding the number of lower court judges, and do you still hold that position?
Senator, I'd welcome more context. I'm not recalling the context in which that statement was made, but I do understand that President Biden has convened a commission to look very broadly at the status of the federal judiciary, and I look forward to seeing the results of that commission's work.
I got 9 seconds for my last question. During Bill Barr's confirmation hearing, you tweeted that Barr, quote, "must acknowledge that his work to promote mass incarceration destroyed communities and harmed people of color," end of quote. So, Joe Biden promoted the crime bill. So the person who nominated you to this position, did he destroy communities and harm people of color by authorizing and authoring and pushing the crime bill?
Well, the war on drugs, I think universally everyone agrees, led to the mass incarceration of people of color. And I think that broadly we've seen many people abandon those policies of the past. And I know that this body, the Senate, has engaged in robust thinking around more progressive criminal justice reform, including you, Senator Grassley, So I just want to acknowledge that some of the thinking of the past, I think, has been abandoned and is putting us on a more progressive path when it comes to race and incarceration in our country.
Thank you very much.
It was one of your more important legislative achievements, Senator Grassley.
You and I together. And
Senator Lee.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm delighted to see both of you here. Let me use my time to ask Ms. Clarke some questions. You know, I've heard some of these, I think, pretty tired old arguments that you're an anti-law enforcement crusader, but you dedicate much of your life in law enforcement. You served as a prosecutor at the federal and state level for more than half of your 20-year legal career. You prosecuted hate crimes, human traffickers, sex offenders. And having been a prosecutor myself, as several of us have up here, I know the dedication it takes to do those kind of prosecutions. And that's probably why you have the support of major law enforcement organizations across the country, including Republicans and Democrats, 70 of them, former state attorneys general. Why are you so proud to have the vocal support of organizations and individuals who, like you, have devoted their career to law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator Leahy. I do not believe that an effective head of the Civil Rights Division can carry out this role without having the ability and the capacity to work with law enforcement. I believe that there is common ground to be found and identified with law enforcement. I've rolled up my sleeves and I've done that work. One of the proudest achievements during my tenure at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law was a partnership that we forged with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where we brought together hate crime victims and survivors, law enforcement rank and file and leaders, and worked to map out effective strategies for improving the way that law enforcement handles the investigation and handling of hate crime incidents in their communities. That kind of partnership, the civil rights community and law enforcement coming together to tackle these problems, is not something that we see every day. You have my commitment, Senator, that what I've done throughout my career, whether it's relying on law enforcement to investigate and prosecute hate crimes and human trafficking cases, whether it's working with law enforcement to find common ground, that these are the principles and values that I will bring to the role if confirmed to lead the Civil Rights Division.
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but as the Senate sponsor of the bipartisan John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, it mystifies me when people argue that restoring the Justice Department's powers under the 1965 Voting Rights Act is a partisan power grab. The voting restrictions being contemplated by many states, which DOJ is currently powerless to stop, would make voting harder for both Democratic and Republican voters. Recently proposed bill in Arizona enforcing an earlier deadline for mail-in ballots would have nullified more Republican ballots than Democratic ballots during the 2020 election. Can you explain why restoring the DOJ's powers to oversee and stop harmful changes to voting procedures is in the interest of the American people of all parties?
I had the privilege and honor of sitting above the Senate floor in 2006 for the 98-0 vote to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. I know that there are 6 members of this committee who were there for that vote, including yourself, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and Senator Cornyn. I believe that bipartisan support for voting rights is something that we should continue to aspire to. We know that ongoing voting discrimination remains a real problem in our country, and the Voting Rights Act has proven to be one of our most powerful tools passed by this body, by the Senate, to help in the effort to ensure that eligible Americans have full access to the ballot.
You know, I'm very proud of my own state of Vermont and Jim Condos, who's our Secretary of State, and he has done everything possible to make sure everybody can vote, and we have a great turnout. And an example, last election, overwhelmingly elected a Republican governor, and then overwhelmingly elected a Democratic lieutenant governor. And I think that's why major actors in society, like the Fortune 500, who normally many of them would be strongly in favor of Republicans, have said, this goes beyond party. We've got to make it easier for people to vote than otherwise. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think we have an excellent nominee here.
Thank you very much, Senator Leahy. Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Clarke, Martin Luther King famously said that he had a dream of the day when his children would be known by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, Senator.
Well, maybe there's a misprint, but I'm sure you can clear it up for me. Dating back to your days when in school, when you seemed to argue that African Americans were genetically superior to Caucasians. Is that correct?
No, Senator. That I believe you're referring to an op-ed that I wrote at the age of 19 about the bell curve theory, a racist book that equated DNA with genetics and race. As a Black student at Harvard that time, we took grave offense to this book. It was co-authored by a Harvard professor. We did a number of events to speak out against the book, and this op-ed opened with a satirical reference to the statement that you just noted. Contemporaneous reporting by the campus paper made very clear that this was not a view that I espoused. What I was seeking to do was to hold up a mirror and put one racist theory alongside another to challenge people as to why we were unwilling to wholly reject the racist theory that defined the bell curve book.
So this was satire?
Absolutely, Senator.
And where was that published?
In the student paper, the Harvard Crimson, and there is contemporaneous reporting from that time, from that day, that makes clear that these were not views that I espoused, Senator.
Do you agree with the proposition that we ought to make it easy for people who are entitled to vote and hard to make it hard for people who are not legally qualified to vote to vote?
I believe, Senator, that we want to ensure that eligible Americans are able to have voice in democracy.
You mean you don't have to register? If you're not registered but eligible, you should still be able to vote?
No, absolutely, Senator. We want to make it easy for people to register,
Right.
Easy for people to vote, and we want to ensure that only eligible people are able to vote.
Do you believe there's such a thing as voter fraud?
I do. I don't see that. I, as somebody who has worked on these issues very closely, don't encounter voter fraud very often, but it does exist. And I know that the criminal division of the Justice Department exists to handle those matters if and when they were to arise.
Do you believe that for every illegal vote cast in an election, it dilutes and undermines the vote of legitimate voters?
I believe that vote fraud is exceedingly rare, but yes.
How do you know that?
We very rarely hear about vote fraud in our country. I run a nonpartisan hotline, the Election Protection Hotline at the Lawyers Committee. We get thousands of calls from people who are having challenges registering, challenges voting, and very rarely, if ever, get complaints regarding fraud.
The last time I was on the ballot in Texas before 2020, there were 4.8 million people to vote. That's 2014. This last year, we had about 11 million people vote, more than double. Do you believe that the votes of people of color were suppressed?
In the state of Texas, I know that there was some litigation to address some of the barriers that people faced during the pandemic. I think those numbers reflect an encouraging picture at the end of the day that reflect the results of advocacy, litigation, and other efforts to make it easier for people to vote amid the deadly pandemic.
Well, in Texas, we had mail-in ballots for people 65 and older, those who are disabled, those who were unable to show up in person on Election Day. We had a full 3 weeks of early voting in person, and people were then able to vote on Election Day. Does that indicate to you that there was any systematic effort to deny minorities an opportunity to vote?
So, Senator, I can recall very vividly reports of long lines that stretched till 2, 3 a.m. During the early part of the pandemic in the primary season. I know that there were some long lines during the early voting period. I think there's still work to do, but I certainly think that those numbers are encouraging and reflect progress in the state of Texas when it comes to accessing the ballot amid the pandemic.
And finally, do you still advocate defunding the police?
I do not advocate defunding the police.
Do you advocate
Senator.
diverting some of the current funding for police for other purposes?
Well, you may be referencing an op-ed that Chairman Grassley referenced, and I don't have the power of the purse, didn't have the power of the purse behind me, so I talked about a way to allocate a limited budget of resources in a way that can ensure that police are able to do their jobs more effectively and ensure community safety. I'm pleased and excited that President Biden has committed $300 million new dollars to cops, and that we're now in a world in which we're working with more resources to tackle these problems.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome to both of our nominees. Ms. Clarke, I have been on the phone recently, or actually, this being the COVID season, I've been on the Zoom recently with a lot of the Rhode Island police chiefs. And one of their most significant concerns right now is the extent to which their engagements with the public are often founded in a behavioral health or mental health issue that is going on. And there's a lot of concern from the chiefs and from line officers that they're being put into situations that they're not as well trained for as true mental health, behavioral health professionals, and that there's not the same kind of support for mental health or behavioral health crises as there should be. Crisis centers, reaction teams, and things like that that can know with professional expertise in behavioral health and mental health issues what is going on and de-escalate and handle what is truly a health issue, not a criminal conduct issue, for what it is. What I would like to do is to enhance funding for those behavioral health efforts. And if we do a really good job of that, we might actually be able to reduce some of the expenditure on the criminal law enforcement side by bringing on people who are more behavioral health experts. We're doing this already in Rhode Island in the addiction space. We have added peer recovery counselors in some police departments who can engage and follow up and try to get to the root cause of what is going on, which is often founded in addiction. Would you view it as defunding the police to invest more in the behavioral health, mental health, and addiction issues that police so often encounter?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Again, I'm excited that the reality is that President Biden has committed more money, more resources, $300 million for cops so that we can help commit greater resources to all of these issues. I know from talking to and working with law enforcement that they want this help. They want to see more resources committed to meeting the mental and emotional health needs of communities. I have talked to sheriffs who have talked about how their jails have essentially been transformed into mental health detention centers. I've talked to sheriffs who've talked about people who work to find their way inside the jail so that they can get access to medication that they can't get elsewhere. I think this is a crisis issue, and I'm glad to see that the Senate is giving attention to this issue. I'm glad that President Biden is committing more resources to meeting the needs of law enforcement generally, and look forward to hopefully finding ways, if confirmed, to working with law enforcement, just as I've done throughout my career, to address these issues.
Thank you. Let me close out by saying that I can't help but notice coincidences sometimes. And it seems like a remarkable coincidence. I've seen it reported that every single Republican-controlled legislative body at the state level in the country is moving forward with efforts to, what some would say, suppress voters, to limit the franchise. Georgia was a particular example, but President Trump's own election security advisor said that this was a legit, honest, very well protected, honest election. The Georgia Republican officials who ran that election stood up and fought President Trump's accusations, defending their work, that that was an honest election. And nevertheless, we have this enormous surge, as if every single ship wheeled as if on command to go after voters. We have Fox Communications going really quite over the top over this. I'll offer a editorial in the New York Times today as an exhibit of a good rebuttal to what some of the Fox talking heads have been up to. We've seen this character, Leonard Leo, who's been the architect of what I call the court packing scheme that was run under President Trump by big special interests, move from that scheme to voter suppression to run something called the Honest Elections Project. So I find it an interesting coincidence at the same time that all those things are happening, very bitter attacks are being launched against you and against Ms. Gupta when you are the two people who will be responsible for enforcing voting rights. And I just want to make a record of that as I close out my time.
And without objection, the article you referenced will be placed in the record. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Clarke, in the fall of 2008, two members of the new Black Panther Party, which is, of course, a violent hate group that focuses on racial violence, stood outside of a polling place in Philadelphia, dressed in military attire and brandishing a billy club. In January 2009, just a couple months later, the Department of Justice charged those same individuals and the new Black Panther Party itself with criminal voter intimidation. But just a month after that, the then new acting head of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division dismissed nearly all the charges. Do you think the U.S. Department of Justice was wrong to prosecute those individuals who showed up at a polling place wielding a billy club?
I believe that the leadership of the Justice Department had the prerogative to bring the cases that it deemed appropriate to bring.
Now, did you want the Department of Justice to drop a case?
I may have espoused that opinion publicly, but so did many people. I think there were many people who deemed that a weak case.
Did you communicate with anyone at the Department of Justice about that, advocating for them dropping it?
I did not engage in any advocacy around that case, if that's what you're asking, Senator.
Right.
I did communicate with people regarding public information, publicly available information about the case.
There are a couple of Department of Justice officials who have testified under oath that while you were at the NAACP, you specifically asked Laura Coates, an attorney within the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, when the case would be dismissed. Is that accurate?
Senator, I have testified under oath, and I'll repeat here, I did not engage in any advocacy one way or another around how the Justice Department should handle that case.
Okay, but you did talk to her about it. You asked her when it would be dismissed.
I don't recall that conversation, Senator.
Now, do you think the Department of Justice should, we'll just step out as one level of abstraction, should the Department of Justice prosecute cases when members of a racially motivated hate group stand outside of a polling place wielding billy clubs?
I think that voter intimidation is a real issue that should be addressed, and there are tools in the Voting Rights Act to help address voter intimidation.
Okay, let's talk about another case. In 2006, the U.S. Department of Justice prosecuted a Democratic committee official, an individual named Ike Brown, who's in Mississippi. He was prosecuted for relentless racial discrimination. And the court held that Brown, quote, had engaged in racially motivated manipulation of the electoral process to the detriment of white voters, close quote. Now, prosecutors produced evidence indicating that Brown had paid off notaries to illegally mark absentee ballots and published a list of voters based on race with a warning that the voters whom he disfavored on the basis of race would be challenged at the polls. Did you disagree with the Department of Justice's decision to prosecute Ike Brown for voter suppression?
So, Senator, in 2006, when that case was filed, I was still at the department. I was in the criminal section serving as a federal prosecutor.
Okay. Now, there's an official at the U.S. Department of Justice who testified under oath that you, quote, spent a considerable amount of time attacking the Civil Rights Division's decision to file and prosecute, close quote, at this particular voter suppression case while you were at the NAACP. Did you discuss the Ike Brown case with officials within the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division?
No, Senator. And to be clear, when that case was filed, I was at the Justice Department, serving as a dedicated federal prosecutor in the criminal section. After I left the Justice Department, I espoused the view that the voter intimidation claim in that case was weak, and the court agreed. That claim was ultimately dismissed by the federal judge who handled that case.
Ms. Clarke, I want to read a non-exhaustive list of elements of the American society, elements that you have at one point or another described in the past as racist. Police departments, federal agencies, Airbnb, election laws designed to combat fraud, the workplace, America's DNA, the Virginia Military Institute, the healthcare industry, federal courts, and the Department of Justice. Now, you've worked for the Department of Justice and with the federal courts. Were those institutions racist when you worked there?
So, Senator, I don't have the context for the list that you just
Have you described them as racist in the past?
I generally use the term discrimination. I'm a lawyer, I follow the facts, and I believe that there are instances where you may find that one particular employer or
Were they
one
racist
particular
when you worked there?
landlord engaged in discriminatory conduct. But I don't deem institutions or structures to be blanketly racist.
Were they racist when you worked there?
I didn't follow the question, Senator.
Was the U.S. Department of Justice a racist institution while you
No,
worked there?
Senator. The Justice Department is anchored by dedicated career employees who work hard every day to follow the facts and to adhere to the law.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I'd like to ask consent to submit for the record a report from the Civil Rights Commission.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. Thank you, Ms. Clarke, Mr. Kim, for appearing before us today and for continuing your dedication to public service. We as a nation are facing generational crises in the areas of civil rights and the environment. Yet in both areas, we also now face urgent needs to revitalize critical work in these areas. And both of you are accomplished public servants with impeccable qualifications and a demonstrated commitment to the rule of law. You are, in other words, exactly what we need in this moment. So I am proud to support both of your nominations. Ms. Clarke, I'm a little bewildered by efforts we've seen here so far today to paint you as somehow anti-law enforcement. So I want to ask you a series of questions, if I could. You were yourself, for years, an actual member of law enforcement as a federal prosecutor. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And in that role, you prosecuted cases involving domestic violence, sex offenses, assaults, human trafficking, hate crimes, official misconduct. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
And you worked on many of those investigations side by side with agents from ICE, from FBI, from law enforcement, from police departments, federal, state, and local. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And you've earned the support of numerous law enforcement groups and by individual chiefs and officers. Is that correct?
I'm proud to sit here with the endorsement of many law enforcement organizations, police chiefs, and more.
In fact, our own former Senate Sergeant at Arms, Terrence Gaynor, joined a letter signed by over 40 police chiefs, sheriffs, other senior officers that described your uncanny ability to work with law enforcement and your impeccable credentials, character, and credibility. And the executive director of the NAPO, the National Association of Police Organizations, said he believes that you and he, and I'm quoting, share a common goal of fair, effective, ethical, and safe law enforcement. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. When I was in local government, I spent 10 years at the county level and was involved in and responsible for oversight of our county police department. I got to know the IACP well, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We relied on them for professional advice and guidance in handling some very tough policy issues. And as president of the Lawyers Committee, you worked closely with the IACP. You created a thorough and well-documented action agenda to enhance the response to hate crimes and strengthen trust between law enforcement and communities. My impression is in that work, you got to know well and work closely with both rank and file and senior chiefs, both policy leaders and those who were the survivors of hate crimes themselves. The IACP executive director wrote that your professional hallmarks are, and I'm quoting, fairness, communicativeness, and championing transparency. Is that a correct characterization of your work with this organization?
I would deem those to be accurate, an accurate description.
So let me just say, as the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus here, I know we desperately need people who can listen to, respect, and work with law enforcement, who can work with the communities that they serve and break down some of the barriers that have imperiled reform. And I think that's exactly who you are. There's been a number of questions about whether or not you support defunding the police. You've said clearly and forcefully no. Let me just ask a last question, if I could, in this area. If you have a choice, and you're not the person who controls the purse strings, we are in the Senate, in the Congress. If you had a choice between additional federal resources to help provide the ability for state and local law enforcement to also have partners, resources to respond to mental health crises, for example. If you had that choice, or you had the choice of reducing the total funding available for law enforcement, which of those two would you choose?
I don't have the power of the purse string, but if I could put my thumb on the scale, I would put it on the side of more resources. That's what we need to tackle the grave issues that we face today. The rise in hate and extremism is just one example of that.
Well, that's something I look forward to fighting for as an appropriator on the subcommittee that funds the Federal Department of Justice. I've talked to senior leaders in the administration. I've talked to President Biden, and I think we can, if we choose to work together, find a way to significantly increase the resources available for law enforcement and for appropriate mental health responses to crises. But Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, I'd like to ask Mr. Kim one question.
Certainly.
Mr. Kim, if I might, we've gotten a lot of attention to your colleague here, but I wanted to ask you one question, if I might. I'm a new co-chair of the International Conservation Caucus, and I'm working with Senator Portman on reauthorizing the Presidential Task Force on Wildlife Trafficking. Would you agree that wildlife trafficking isn't just a conservation issue? It's one that threatens the security of our international partners, because the networks that often conduct wildlife trafficking are also involved in other natural resources crimes, human trafficking, drug trafficking, moving weapons, drugs, and money. Do you see it as an important crime to investigate and prosecute?
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely, I agree with that. Wildlife trafficking is important not only because of its effect directly on wildlife, but also because of his documented connections with international criminal organizations. It is currently a priority of the division, and if confirmed, I would hope to keep it a priority as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful that both of you are willing to continue your careers in public service and look forward to supporting your confirmation by the Senate and your service as part of the administration. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coons. I'd like to acknowledge that Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, is present. You certainly are welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to recognize Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to both of the nominees. Ms. Clarke, as I look to your record, I see the record of someone who has spent a career as a partisan advocate. Last year, you wrote an op-ed in Newsweek entitled, "I Prosecuted Police Killings, Defund the Police, but Be Strategic." Do you still believe it is a good idea to defund the police?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I do not support defunding the police. The impetus for writing that op-ed was to make clear that I do not support defunding the police, and I spend considerable time talking about the need to channel resources to places such as mental health treatment to alleviate some of the burdens that we place on the doorstep of law enforcement, some of the issues we ask them to wrestle with that are outside their core competency. But
Ms. Clarke, let me, and we have limited time, so let me, you say you don't support defunding the police. You just said it twice. The title of your article was Defund the Police, but let's not just look to the title. Your article begins by saying that the national protests we saw last year, quote, opened up space for transformative policy discussions. You then continue to write, into that space, and this is a quote, into that space has surged a unifying call from the Black Lives Matter movement, defund the police. Do you really believe defund the police is a unifying call?
I don't support defund the police.
I'm reading from your article. Do you disagree with your article?
Amidst the demonstrations and protests, I wanted to provide a different perspective. I don't support taking away resources from police and putting communities in harm's way. There's a rise in hate crimes and extremism.
Ms. Clarke, you know you're testifying under oath here.
Please allow her to.
You just said a moment ago.
Senator Cruz, please allow her to complete her answers.
Well, I'm not going to allow her to filibuster, so I'm going to ask a question. If she wants to answer the question that I asked, she can do so, but I'm not
She
going
should
to.
be allowed. I hope you'll show respect to the witness and
I
allow her
will
to.
show respect to every witness, but we also have limited time, as you're aware, and you've been on this committee long enough to know that witnesses, in avoiding questions, will try to filibuster on different topics. So I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to expect answers to the questions I ask. And I understand the chairman wants to jump in and defend the witnesses, but that's your prerogative to try to do so.
I will defend witnesses on either side and members on either side. We will be respectful in this committee. I hope that all members will.
I hope and expect the same standard will be applied to senators on both sides. Now, let's return to, you just said you don't support cutting funds from police. I find that astonishing and, Ms. Clarke, frankly, not credible, because I'm holding the article you wrote, and I actually pulled out a highlighter and highlighted the beginning of each paragraph going through. And about midway through, you have a paragraph that says, we must invest less in police and more in social workers. The next paragraph is, we must invest less in police and more in social support to our schools. The next paragraph begins, we must invest less in police and more in mental health aid. 3 paragraphs in your article, you begin with the words, we must invest less in police, and you just told this committee under oath you don't support investing less in police. How do you square those?
If I may, Senator, I support the fact that President Biden is committing $300 million new dollars for the COPS program, $300 million new dollars for resources to the police. I wrote that op-ed without having the power of the purse string behind me and talked about how we can allocate a limited pool of resources in a more effective way.
So you believe you were wrong last year when you called for defunding the police and investing less in the police?
It's a poor title chosen by the editor.
It's not just the title, it's your text. We must invest less in police. 3 paragraphs should begin with those words. You wrote those words. Do you agree with those words today?
Without the power of the purse string, I wrote those words, but President Biden is committing more resources to police, and I think that's a great thing, Senator.
All right, let's shift to another topic. Your advocacy and, frankly, extreme position on defunding the police is paired with a history of not only excusing, but celebrating murderers who have murdered police officers. It's been reported that during law school, you helped organize a conference with speakers who referred to convicted cop killers as political prisoners. This included Mumia Abu-Jamal, who murdered a Philadelphia police officer, and Asanta Shakur, who was convicted of murdering a New Jersey state trooper, escaped from prison, and is on the FBI's most wanted list. Did you organize the conference? And do you support celebrating those who murder police officers as heroes and political prisoners?
That conference you're referring to was organized by the late Dr. Manning Marable, a noted historian who led the Institute for Research in African American Studies. I was a student providing support for the Institute, working on a range of projects. As to the second question, Senator, no, I do not celebrate the loss of life.
So if you say you didn't organize the conference, why did multiple speakers at the conference thank you by name for inviting them to speak at the conference?
Because I was a hardworking student that made sure people were fed, mailed out invitations, provided the agenda. I was a student providing logistical support to a notable historian who was the one who organized that conference.
So if there's a police officer in Philadelphia or New Jersey today watching this hearing, how are they supposed to react to your nomination to one of the senior positions of the Department of Justice, knowing that as a student you participated in a conference celebrating and lionizing cop killers who murdered a Philadelphia police officer and a New Jersey state trooper? How should a cop today watching this react to that news?
I have never and would not ever celebrate the loss of life or the killing of a police officer, Senator, not ever.
Do you
Thank
believe they're
Senator
political
Cruz.
prisoners?
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of topics I want to try to cover relatively quickly, but let me begin by a question for Ms. Clarke. This op-ed from Newsweek has been referenced repeatedly throughout this hearing with reference to the titles. Let me be specific. Did you write the title? Did you pick the title? Was this title your choice?
It was not, Senator. I often defer to the editors I work with on choosing titles. They often have good judgment about a title that will help ensure that your thoughts and ideas get read. It's not a title that aligns well with the piece. I don't support defunding the police.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, let me share with you at least a perspective and a line of thought that's mine, not yours. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you tell me if you agree or disagree with it. And I speak not just as a current senator and former Secretary of State, but former state senator prior to that, and for 7.5 years having served on the Los Angeles City Council, during which time the city of Los Angeles negotiated and entered into a consent decree to bring about reforms in the Los Angeles Police Department. So both as a resident, someone who grew up in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s, the role of a police department or a public safety agency is not just to arrest for arrest's sake. It should be part of a comprehensive plan to improve public safety. And what better way to improve public safety, in addition to holding to account those who commit crimes, than to prevent crimes to begin with? So when we talk about how it's used and abused, the term defund the police, it's not just a level of budgeting for a particular department, but if you can invest, as others have suggested, more in mental health, more in education, more in economic opportunities for people, history shows, data shows, crime goes down. And isn't that the ultimate objective, to prevent, if you can, crime from beginning in the first place? Your thoughts?
Absolutely, Senator. This is about providing more resources to ensure public safety and to ensure that law enforcement can do their jobs well. This is about finding ways to work with law enforcement. Sometimes it's by way of consent decrees. Sometimes it's by way of providing technical assistance, as we see the Justice Department doing, grant making, training, and collaboration.
Thank you. Different topic, questions for Mr. Kim. Appreciate our opportunity to connect by phone. Yesterday, as you know, I mentioned not just specifically the Exide plant in Vernon, California, which has gotten a fair share amount of attention, but specifically a letter I addressed to now Attorney General Garland in a concern about this case in particular, but more broadly, the use of non-prosecution agreements as a tool in achieving environmental settlements. In this particular case, there was initially an agreement for the owners of Exide to not just leave the facility, no longer continue the activity that was polluting a largely working-class community, but to clean up the land and the mess that they left behind. Through a bankruptcy court, they were allowed to simply leave the facility and leave the taxpayers of California on the hook for cleanup. So any comment about the Exide battery plant in Vernon specifically, or more broadly, should you be confirmed, how you would approach, what policies and considerations you would take in entertaining non-prosecution agreements?
Thank you very much, Senator, for the question. Not being at the department currently, only being a nominee, not having access to internal Department of Justice information, I don't think I'm in a position to comment specifically on that matter. But I can say more broadly that I would approach questions like that one, including questions about non-prosecution agreements in this particular manner. I would consult with career lawyers and subject matter experts, client agencies as appropriate, to ensure that every enforcement decision, whether criminal or civil, would be based on the facts and on the law.
My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Padilla. Senator Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the nominees for being here. Ms. Clarke, I'd like to start with you, if I could, and talk a little bit about the First Amendment. You've written that in the midst of this pandemic, religion has been used as a pretext, that's your word, to challenge public health restrictions. You've been particularly critical of the United States Supreme Court in a case called Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn versus Como. That was a case involving Orthodox Jewish communities and some Christian communities in which a majority of the court found that the state of New York had unevenly and indeed in a discriminatory fashion applied COVID restrictions to the Jewish community and to some of the Christian communities. In particular, the per curiam decision of the court says that the governor, that's the Cuomo, specifically targeted the Orthodox Jewish community and gerrymandered the boundaries of red and orange zones, those are the restrictive zones, to ensure that heavily Orthodox areas were included. And they go on to say that the challenge rules can be viewed as targeting the ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities. Now, you said of this opinion that this is a newly configured Supreme Court, one with justices who place religious freedom above all caps, even in the context of a deadly pandemic. Are we to take from that you think it is okay for executive officials to target religious communities, religious minorities in particular, in this case Orthodox Jews?
No, Senator. I think religious liberty is important. I think fighting religious discrimination is important. This is something I've done throughout my career.
So how do you explain then your criticism of this decision? You think that the court should have permitted the governor to continue to target the Orthodox Jewish community and to engage in disparate treatment of that religious minority?
Religious discrimination is always wrong. It's something I've fought throughout my career. I do think there's some novel issues that have arisen amid the deadly pandemic, and I have expressed views about the steps that I think public health officials needed to take to help bring down the death rate and to help save lives. that would be the extent of my commentary there. But religious liberty is important, and standing up against religious discrimination is something I've done throughout my career, Senator.
Do you think that religious associations, synagogues, churches, mosques should be treated less favorably than secular institutions?
The Civil Rights Division has in its arsenal a number of tools. The Church Arson Prevention Act, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, to ensure actually that churches and houses of worship are not subject to discrimination. This is work I've done throughout my career and that I would look forward to doing if confirmed to this role.
Well, you're absolutely right about DOJ's authorities there, and that's why your views concern me. In the same opinion that you so sharply criticized, the court found that in one of the zones designated by Como, a synagogue or church may not admit more than 10 persons. However, other businesses like acupuncture facilities, campgrounds, garages, things like plants manufacturing chemicals, microelectronics, and all transportation facilities could admit as many people as they wanted. In another zone, attendance to houses of worship was limited to 25 people. And yet, the businesses in that zone could decide for themselves how many people to admit. The district court found that a large store in Brooklyn could literally have hundreds of people shopping there on any given day, and yet a synagogue or a church could have no more than 25 people. The court concluded from this that not only was this not equal, this was actually disparate treatment on the basis of religion, but you criticized this as elevating religious liberty, as putting it above public health, when in fact these synagogues and churches were being treated in a discriminatory fashion. How do you square that?
My focus on the case was on the very surface issue about how do we protect lives amid a deadly pandemic. I ran a religious rights unit at the New York Attorney General's office. I know about religious discrimination and have fought it throughout my career. I've stood up to neo-Nazis. I've spoken out when we've seen attacks on our houses of worship. And Senator, you have my commitment that if confirmed to the role, I will continue to do just that. Stand up for religious liberty and fight religious discrimination at every turn.
Did you speak out when the governor of New York was targeting Orthodox Jewish communities for disparate treatment so severe and significant that the Supreme Court of the United States rebuked him and said it was a constitutional violation?
Well, I did not work on this case or have an
But you commented on this case at quite some length and took the
Indeed.
opposite opinion.
Well, not at length, but I was very concerned.
Well, I
about
have the tweets here. I mean, we can have them entered into the record.
Well, I was very concerned about the pandemic and very concerned about figuring out what are the steps officials need to take to save lives. But throughout my career, I have stood up for religious liberty and fought religious discrimination, and will continue to do that if confirmed to the role, Senator.
My time has expired. I would just say in closing, Ms. Clarke, I would hope that you'd be concerned about the Constitution of the United States, which does not disappear during a pandemic or when some elected executive wants it to disappear, particularly if you are a religious minority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of you for appearing today. And I'll start with you, Ms. Clarke, because I've worked with you extensively on voting rights and other issues, and I know you appeared before our Rules Committee with Senator Blunt and I, and just did an excellent job. I want to thank you for that. And got respect from both sides of the aisle in terms of your testimony and how you answered questions. We know that we've had hundreds of voter suppression bills be introduced across the country since the last election. Could you briefly talk about your top priorities for voting rights when you get what I hope very much you will get this job?
Thank you so much, Senator. President Biden, Attorney General Garland have talked about the importance of the right to vote, and I will follow their lead in ensuring that the Civil Rights Division, if I am confirmed, is using the tools in its arsenal, the Voting Rights Act, the National Voter Registration Act, the Uniformed and Overseas Absentee Citizens Voting Act, to ensure that eligible Americans have access to the ballot in our country.
Thank you. And I thank you for mentioning the families of both Daunte Wright as well as George Floyd. Obviously, these are tragedies in my own state and my constituents. have been through a lot with the murder of George Floyd, with the shooting of Dante Clark, with the understanding that Dante Wright, with the understanding that the word in the news is there's going to be charges in that case as well today. But you also mentioned Officer Evans' family, which I appreciated. And I was someone who was at that memorial service yesterday, stood with the police officers as his body was taken for the last time out of the Capitol, right over the site where he was killed, was at the funeral of George Floyd. And I think you understand that you can both advocate for police reform and the rights of citizens and still respect deeply police. Could you comment about that and some of the things that you think we should be doing with police reform, which I strongly support? And I see Senator Booker is here, who's been such a leader on this. We appreciate that. Just how you can do both things at once.
Thank you so much for that question, Senator. I've not shied away, as a civil rights lawyer, I've not shied away from working with law enforcement. I needed to and relied on law enforcement to handle my cases as a federal prosecutor at the Justice Department. Hate crimes, human trafficking cases, domestic violence matters that we could not move forward without the expertise and good guidance of law enforcement. At the New York State Attorney General's office, I worked closely with sheriffs, with the state police to investigate cases. At the Lawyers Committee where I am presently, we rolled up our sleeves and worked with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I think that there is a lot of common ground to be forged when it comes to issues of police reform and accountability and criminal justice reform generally. I appreciate that this role, leading the Civil Rights Division, is not a policy-making role, it's a law enforcement role. And I look forward to supporting the work of this body as it continues to wrestle with these issues and find pathways to progressive and healthy reforms.
Very good, thank you. And then I turn to you, Mr. Kim. I had a chance encounter with your sons, Paulden and Jigme, in the hallway, and I see they're very well behaved behind you right now. And I would fill my other fellow senators in on, they spontaneously were able to recount several incidences from the presidential primary debates, which was quite impressive. Quite impressive. So anyone who is looking for, an advisor in the future, they're sitting behind Mr. Kim right now. We know that there were many issues of a lack of enforcement in the Justice Department during the last administration, 70% fewer Clean Water Act prosecutions, 50% fewer Clean Air cases during the first 2 years of the administration. And you've had some vast experience in this. And could you just take a second to talk about how you actually have worked for both the Bush administration and Democratic administrations, and you have served as a civil servant at the Justice Department under Republican, Democratic administrations. Can you talk about your history of believing in the Justice Department and its role beyond politics, and also how that will help you to do well in this job?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the kind
And
words
could you
about my
explain
son.
how your sons know all that stuff?
I can't explain that, actually. But I can say that if confirmed, what I really hope is to reaffirm the core values that the department has long stood for: fairness, independence, integrity, devotion to the rule of law. These values really matter to me, and it excites me tremendously to have the chance to return to the department and try to live up to those ideals. I have seen the statistics as well about drops in enforcement. I'm not at the department right now, so I can't speak to what's happened, at least directly as to any particular enforcement decision. But as Ms. Clarke, I think, quite rightly said, this is not a policy role, this is an enforcement role. And so I want to make sure the rule of law is properly respected and that every enforcement decision is based on the facts and based on the law. And that's what I hope to do if confirmed.
Very good. I appreciate both of you very much. And I also appreciate the choice of your mom's school at the University of Minnesota. So very good. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Cotton.
Ms. Clarke, was Officer Darren Wilson justified when he shot and killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014?
So there is a trial underway right now, Senator, and I, like millions of people, am sitting back and watching the trial as it plays out, and I'm prepared to accept the verdict of the jury.
In November of 2020, just a few months ago, that was not exactly what you said. You said that on this day, a grand jury chose not to indict Darren Wilson for the killing of Michael Brown. It's a powerful reminder of why we need to make clear that Black Lives Matter. We must demand that the Department of Justice resume pattern practice investigations and expand prosecutions involving police shootings. I would also point out that Eric Holder's Department of Justice in March 2015 conducted an extensive review of Officer Darren Wilson's conduct and concluded that it did not support the filing of criminal charges. They issued an 87-page report that was done under the watch of your fellow nominee, Vanita Gupta, I might add. In fact, there have been 3 separate investigations that have cleared Officer Wilson of wrongdoing. And just last year, however, just last year in June, you sent a letter to Congress in which you described the Michael Brown case as, quote, prosecutorial decisions not to indict police because of impenetrable qualified immunity for police and acquittals based on racism, end quote. Why do you continue, despite all this evidence to the contrary from many of your fellow Democrats, to refuse to take an answer on whether, or take a position on whether Officer Darren Wilson was justified or not in the shooting of Michael Brown?
And Senator, if I can, I want to correct my answer. I indicated that there was a trial still going on, which is not the case. So I just want to offer up that correction. I think that in general, there is a need for greater police accountability. There is a bipartisan agreement on this issue. I know that this body did a lot of work last year.
Ms. Clarke, those are all policy questions, and we'd have that policy debate. But I'm asking you a simple factual question. Was Officer Darren Wilson justified or not in the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014? Vanita Gupta has said he was. Eric Holder has said he was. 3 different investigations have said he was. I'm asking you, was he or was he not justified in that shooting?
As a private citizen, based on the facts that I know, I'm not privy to the details that the federal government may have been privy to in the course of its investigation. As a private citizen, there is something that feels unfair. And
the Department of Justice issued an 87-page report. That's not that's not grand jury sensitive information. That's not secret. It's an 87-page report released by Vanita Gupta when she ran the office that you aspire to lead. It concluded that the shooting was justified.
All right. Well,
you obviously do not want to take the position that the shooting was justified, despite what Eric Holder and Vanita Gupta have said, given the fact that you won't answer the simple question yes or no. Let's turn to another case, which Jacob Blake...
Senator, could you please just allow her opportunity to respond?
Could you please stop your pattern of interrupting me repeatedly? This happened the last time we had a hearing.
I'm sorry.
You called a vote in violation of this committee's rules.
I will give you additional time, but I'd like to give her a chance to complete her answer.
I've asked her a simple yes or no question multiple times. She refuses to answer it. Thank you, though, for your input. Let's turn to another case. Jacob Blake. Was Jacob Blake armed when he was shot during an encounter with the police last year in Kenosha, Wisconsin?
I believe the reports indicated that he may have had a weapon on him. I'm not certain of that, Senator.
He was armed with a knife. That is not in dispute. Witnesses have said that he was armed with a knife. But yet again, you jump to conclusions. In the aftermath of that shooting, you repeatedly said on social media that he was unarmed. So today, would you like to take a position on whether Jacob Blake was armed or unarmed in his encounter with the police in Kenosha last summer?
If the subsequent reports reveal to the public that he indeed had a knife, I agree with that factual statement.
So, Mrs. Clarke, here's my concern. It's one thing to run a left-wing advocacy organization and always jump to conclusions about police officers who have to use force to protect themselves or to protect innocent, law-abiding Americans. Those are the last people, by the way, who want to have to use force, and certainly force that results in a killing. Yet you always jump to those conclusions. It's one thing to do that as a private citizen, as an advocate, but you are going to have the power of the federal government behind you. And based on your pattern of comments and jumping to conclusions without evidence, every cop in America should be terrified that the Department of Justice is going to jump to a conclusion when they have to make a split-second decision to defend themselves or defend innocent law-abiding citizens.
If I can, Senator, I've done this job before. I served as a federal prosecutor during the Bush administration. I did that work with the benefit of working alongside and with expert FBI agents who helped to investigate and review the matters before us. As a private citizen running a nonpartisan organization, I appreciate that it's a different role. You have my commitment, Senator, that if I am confirmed to this position, I'll do what I did as a dedicated career attorney inside the Justice Department, which is follow the facts and the law and be guided by the work of FBI agents and other federal law enforcement agents if and when these matters arise.
And police officers all around America can see today that you won't even agree with Vanita Gupta and Eric Holder that Darren Wilson was justified in the shooting of Michael Brown in 2014.
I've not seen that report or read it thoroughly, and I'd welcome the opportunity to do so, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono, remote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Clarke and Mr. Kim, I asked the following two foundational questions of every nominee who comes before any of the committees on which I sit. Two questions. Ms. Clarke, you can answer first, and then Mr. Kim. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Mr. Kim?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Ms. Clarke, you were a line prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division, and you have extensive experience dealing with hate crimes. Addressing hate crimes has also been a major focus of your work at the Lawyers Committee. And during the pandemic, acts of hate against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been on the rise, in fact, significantly. Close to 4,000 have been reported in the past year, coming into this year. And we've heard and seen the attacks. For example, a 65-year-old Filipino immigrant was walking down a street near Times Square in New York when a man in broad daylight suddenly kicked her in the stomach. As she fell to the ground, he continued to kick her and shouted, "You don't belong here." Several men, including a security guard at the apartment building, simply watched as all this took place. I just want to note that later today, the Senate will be voting on a bill called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which I hope will receive bipartisan support as one step toward addressing the hate crimes against AAPIs. I'd like to ask you, Ms. Clarke, based on your experience, what do you think should be done to address the continuing incidents of hate crimes against the AAPI community?
Thank you, Senator. I'm deeply concerned about the rise in hate that we are seeing, particularly targeting the Asian American Pacific Islander community in our country. The Justice Department has at its disposal the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, the Fair Housing Act, and other tools in its arsenal to help stand up and confront this hate. We need better data tracking. New York City is one of the few places that's tracking data impacting the AAPI community, and we know that in March and April of 2020, there were as many anti-Asian hate crimes in that 2-month period as there were in the previous 4 years combined. And we benefit from stronger data collection to understand where these issues are most stark so that we can really focus law enforcement resources on ensuring the safety of the AAPI community. But I agree, Senator, that this is a crisis that warrants all of our attention.
Well, part of the COVID-19 hate crimes bill that I mentioned is very much focused on data collection, so we get in a voluntary way from the states and local law enforcement to submit this kind of data online. You would agree that these crimes are underreported, wouldn't you?
Yes, Senator, we need to do a better job at data collection so that we can understand where the problems lie.
Turning to voting rights, since January 1st, 390 voter suppression bills have been introduced across 45 states. And of course, we know what happened in Georgia. This is the legacy of the Supreme Court's Shelby County decision in 2013. which basically gutted a major part of the Voting Rights Act and unleashed a wave of new restrictive voting laws across the country. In fact, right after that decision, some 13 states proceeded to enact voter suppression laws, new ID requirements, you name it. The Supreme Court has before it 2 cases from Arizona, and it is expected that the court's conservative majority will even more narrow the Voting Rights Act by narrowing the effectiveness of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So basically, if anyone had any questions about the motives behind all these voter suppression laws, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, asked a lawyer from the Arizona Republican Party why, and he said that allowing more people to vote puts Republicans, and I'm quoting, at a competitive disadvantage. You worked in the Civil Rights Division's voting section, and you co-directed the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund's voting rights docket. Why is it so important to have robust voting rights laws at the federal level?
Thank you, Senator. The right to vote is one of the most central rights in our democracy. And the Voting Rights Act exists to ensure that eligible Americans can have voice in our democracy. And the U.S. Department of Justice has long played a central role here. And if confirmed, Senator, you have my commitment that I'll use the tools that the division has in its arsenal to ensure that eligible Americans are able to participate in our voting process.
As we're watching what I would call disparate policing in our country, the importance of consent decrees by the DOJ is something that I've asked the various nominees, and I hope that you will also look at consent decrees as a way to ensure that there is not this kind of disparate law enforcement by police in our country. I think I'm out of time. I can't tell. I can't read that clock.
Senator, your time is concluded. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Senator
Thought I
Blackburn.
put that thought out there.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank each of you for being here today. And, you know, it's an important hearing for us to have. When I talk to Tennesseans, they are very concerned about voting rights legislation. They are very concerned about a civil rights division that is going to overreach under current laws. And of course, they want everyone eligible to vote. Indeed, our nation has seen historic turnout in voting. But, you know, the Department of Justice has incredible resources to investigate governments, local and state governments, over voting rights. And many times, the states or the locality do not have the money to fight back, even when they're on the right side of the law. So, Ms. Clarke, let me continue along this line of questioning, because the Civil Rights Division is charged with enforcing voting laws, and I'm concerned with your past statements that it could prevent you from doing your job effectively. You've been an outspoken critic of voter ID laws. You've said that photo ID requirements are, and I'm quoting you, burdensome. Proof of citizenship requirements are and I'm quoting, bag of tricks to suppress black votes. Is that correct?
Thank you, Senator. I believe that we have to look at these laws on a case-by-case basis. A photo ID law in one state may be perfectly fine, but may have an impact in another state on protected groups, on older people, on people of color. So I think that it's important to look at these on a case-by-case basis.
So do you think that it's fair then for individuals to be required to show their photo ID to get a prescription at the pharmacy?
Yes. And
you think that is unfair?
I don't think it's unfair, but I do think that when it comes
All right,
to...
let me move on. You've asserted that the cost of voter ID laws outweigh any benefits. Is that true that you tweeted that, and I'm quoting, vote fraud is a myth and a lie?
Vote fraud is something that is exceedingly rare. We don't see it often. And if it exists, and if there are reports...
We know that it does. We know that it does.
I will, if confirmed, refer those matters to the
Okay.
criminal division so that they can handle those matters.
Okay. Tennessee has a voter ID law, and we are really just so grateful for the work that our state and our Department of State has done to lead local and state entities as we have reformed elections, we have cleaned up voter rolls, required ID to vote, and restored accountability. Despite this progress, Democrats want to crush local governments to push through their own impractical agenda, which will undermine trust in the electoral process. And I'm convinced you will be the lead warrior in that liberal agenda to destroy local election integrity. And I fear you will use your power at the Civil Rights Division to take away states' rights, their constitutional duty, and federalize control of elections. Let me ask you about the First Amendment. I've been listening in my office to your comments on the First Amendment. You called, and this is particularly pointed toward religious liberty, you called the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision devastating and stated that religion is often used as a pretext to ignore regulations during the COVID-19 pandemic. After the Supreme Court blocked New York's COVID restrictions on houses of worship, you tweeted, "This is a newly configured Supreme Court with justices who place religious freedom above all else, even in the context of a deadly pandemic." So is it true that you even called the religious liberty organization Alliance Defending Freedom an anti-LGBTQ hate group?
Senator, if I could just respond to the first point that you raised, I view voting rights issues in a nonpartisan sense. And I thank you for being one of the 390 people who voted to reauthorize Section 5 in 2006. As to your second point, please note that I deem religious liberty incredibly important, and I have fought for religious liberty throughout my career. I have fought religious discrimination. I led a religious rights unit, a newly launched religious rights unit at the New York State Attorney General's office, and if confirmed, I will give great attention to ensuring that we stand up for religious liberty and beat back religious discrimination using the laws that the division has at its disposal.
Ms. Clarke, you didn't answer the question. Did you state, did you call the Alliance Defending Freedom an anti-LGBTQ hate group? Yes or no?
I don't recall that statement. I'd like to see to confirm, Senator. That's not an organization I'm very familiar with. I'd love to see the context.
If you would like to, I think it was in a tweet, and we'll be happy to supply that for you.
Thank you, Senator.
So that you can see it. But see, here's the thing. Religion is important. Religious liberty and freedom and the First Amendment is vitally important. And with the tweets that you have made, with the statements that you have made that are very vitriolic toward that First Amendment, it causes me to question if you could be fair and impartial and apply the law as written and defend these rights and freedoms that are so vitally important. And right now, I hear from Tennesseans every day who are filled with angst because they fear that their freedoms are going to be taken away. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. In the absence of the chair, I have been asked to preside, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, and then if there is another Republican ready to go before Senator Ossoff, we'll go with him or her. Ms. Clarke and Mr. Kim, both of you have extraordinary records of public service, professional excellence, and distinguished integrity, and I think both of you are more than qualified for your positions. And I have a couple of questions for Ms. Clarke, particularly about a very sensitive but profoundly important topic that ought to concern all of us. A number of our colleagues have raised questions about potential anti-Semitism. Senator Lee, in questioning Merrick Garland during his confirmation, made direct reference to you and asked about anti-Semitism, and Senator Hawley, in passing just now, may have done so as well. So I want to address this issue head-on so that you have an opportunity to answer it, since it may be used in the course of the debate about your confirmation, Ms. Clarke. And I just want to say right at the outset, as Merrick Garland said, and I'm quoting him, "I'm a pretty good judge of what an anti-Semite is." I feel pretty much the same way. I think I know an anti-Semitic person when I see and hear one, and I've scrutinized your record, and I am absolutely fully satisfied that there isn't an anti-Semitic bone in your body. But I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to that kind of question, and rather than maybe answer a question, just give you a chance to speak to the Jewish community, as it were, that may be raising this question as a result of these allusions by a number of my colleagues, unfairly referenced. And I want to thank you for your leadership in the fight against anti-Semitism at the Lawyers Committee and the New York Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Bureau, and just give you a chance to talk to this issue and to the Jewish community.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I could not be an effective civil rights lawyer if I did not have the ability and capacity to work with, alongside, and behalf of all people of all backgrounds, regardless of race, religion, national background, and more. Anti-Semitism is real and is something that I have fought throughout my career. At the Lawyers Committee, we have taken on neo-Nazis like the Daily Stormer. You mentioned my time at the New York State Attorney General's Office, where I helped to launch a religious rights unit, where among the many things that we did was we fought for religious accommodations for Sabbath-observing employees who were denied those accommodations by their employers. I'm proud and humbled to sit here today with the support of many Jewish organizations, including the National Council of Jewish Women, the Anti-Defamation League, the Union for Reform Judaism, which represents more than 2 million Reform Jews, and dozens of other organizations that I will look to work with in the continued fight against anti-Semitism if I am confirmed to this role. I am gravely concerned about the rise in hate and extremism that we're seeing in this country, that Black people are experiencing, LGBTQ people, the AAPI community, and it is not lost on me that Jewish people continue to suffer from anti-Semitism, and this is an ill that I hope to fight back against if confirmed to the role.
Thank you. Later today, I hope to offer as an amendment the No Hate Act, which I introduced during the last session and which I plan to introduce again this session. It would spur greater reporting of hate crimes. You've just mentioned very appropriately the rise of domestic terrorism and hate violence in this country directed at different minorities. The bill now on the floor, which I hope will proceed today, will stimulate, I hope, greater reporting. Can you speak to why hate crimes reporting is so critical to addressing this growing problem insofar as you will be head of the division that prosecutes hate crimes in this country?
Thank you, Senator. The federal government has vast resources but limited resources. And so it's important to understand where the fires are burning and where are the crises that need to be tackled. And we can only do that with data to understand where we're seeing a spike or a sudden rise in hate. And I hope that if confirmed, I'll be able to work with other components of the Justice Department to ensure that law enforcement is doing a better job in the road ahead on capturing, collecting, and reporting this data, which is so critical to the fight against hate.
Thank you very much. I'm going to recognize Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you, two distinguished nominees. Congratulations on your nominations to these positions. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for putting yourselves through this process. Thanks also to your families who are also weathering, unfortunately, a storm of personal attacks directed at two highly qualified nominees for these federal positions. Ms. Clarke, I want to also thank you and commend you for your long history as an opponent of anti-Semitism and an advocate for equal justice and an ally of the Jewish people. And I'd like to ask you a couple of questions regarding your responsibilities should you be confirmed to lead the Civil Rights Division. I don't believe that the state should be in the business of killing its own citizens. That's why I am an opponent of the death penalty. And when the killing of citizens is extrajudicial, in my view, that is an egregious form of violence and an act of tyranny. This week, yet again, the nation is grappling with the reality that, in particular, unarmed black men are subjected to violence at the hands of the state. Another young black man shot to death by a law enforcement officer. How will you use the power of this office to end extrajudicial killings of American citizens by law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator. The Civil Rights Division has been empowered by Congress to investigate unconstitutional conduct by law enforcement. And we know that this is a real and ongoing challenge that we face. The division has the ability to open pattern and practice investigations into police departments, jails, or other institutions that may be engaged in unconstitutional conduct. There's 18 U.S.C. 242, which is one tool that can be used to promote accountability of law enforcement officers who use force without basis and in an unconstitutional way. But Attorney General Garland has talked about the other tools in the division's arsenal, and I agree that in addition, we have to think about training and technical assistance and grant making as other tools to help promote improvements in this incredibly important area.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. Turning our attention now to voting rights. Georgia recently passed what is now an infamous law restricting access to the ballot, slashing early voting opportunities in runoff elections, closing down access to ballot drop boxes at hours convenient for working class people. And as has been discussed in this hearing, the Shelby County v. Holder decision, which eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, has removed the pre-clearance requirement that the Civil Rights Division would execute, requiring local and state authorities to secure pre-clearance from the Department of Justice before making such changes to election procedures and election laws. Do you agree that it is vital that Congress restore what will be your authority, should you be confirmed, to pre-clear changes to voting laws and voting procedures to ensure that there is not racial or partisan targeting and that abusive election laws do not restrict access to the ballot.
Thank you, Senator. History has shown that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act has been a powerful tool in combating and deterring ongoing voting discrimination. And I know that this body has taken up the question through the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. And I know that that process has involved looking at the current picture of ongoing voting discrimination in our country. If confirmed, I look forward to providing support and being a resource for the House and Senate as it considers modifying Section 4 so that we can reinstate the Section 5 preclearance provision, which, again, historically has been such a powerful tool in beating back voting discrimination in our country.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. Mr. Kim, with my brief time remaining, what act of Congress might be required or rulemaking might be required to enable the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice to regulate the emission of greenhouse gases as air pollution under authorities in the Clean Air Act or another relevant statute?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Climate change is plainly a very important issue. It's a priority of the administration, it'll be a priority of mine. I can't speak to policy issues. I'd be in a law enforcement role, and I would defer to the administration as to further legislation that might be necessary. But I would note there is already some regulation of greenhouse gases, as, for instance, a consequence of the Supreme Court decision, Massachusetts v. EPA.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Booker.
Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful that I'm recognized and grateful to be last and to know that this hearing has come to an end. Mr. Kim, I've had a chance to talk about you, but I have not had a chance to really talk to and about my friend Kristen Clarke. There is a tradition in the African-American tradition of incredible artistry in the midst of oppression. We know that it was Langston Hughes who wrote a poem entitled Mother to Son, where he just simply said, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. As you sit with your son behind you, I am telling you and this nation that for you, life ain't been no crystal stair. You have come up from being a low-income American, facing childhood difficulties, benefited from the grace and the goodness that is our country, that helped to establish programs and opportunities that understand your genius would be better blossoming if we cared for one another and loved one another. And God, given an opportunity, what did you do with it? You have dedicated your life to our most sacred principles. There is another poem that today really came to mind. I think you may be familiar with it. You may try to write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may try to trod me down in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. That could be the theme of the last year, where I have seen the most outrageous lies being touted about you that have tried to obscure your incredible record of service. People are trying to say you're wrong for this job when, dear God, you are what we need in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. And I want to tell people who think you're wrong, well, if you are wrong, then John Adams was wrong, who represented British, who killed Americans at the Boston Massacre. If you're wrong for this job, then Thurgood Marshall was wrong, who stood up for the despised, and the hated, and the vilified, and the overlooked, and spent his career trying to fight for those who others ignore. If you're wrong, then Charles Hamilton Houston is wrong, who said very strongly that either you are a lawyer for the public interest or you're a leech upon society. God, if you're wrong, then what are we saying to all Americans, but in particular to that black girl that is somewhere in America right now, who feels amidst a nation that still has not shed the ugly cloak of bigotry and hate, that God, she can have an America where people every day are fighting for her, hear her, that see her. Today is a proud day for our country because one of its incredible women is ascending to a position where she will get to serve. And if you are wrong for this job, then the law enforcement agencies that have endorsed you, from attorneys generals to police officers, they're wrong. If you're wrong for this job, then the incredible Jewish leaders from the Anti-Defamation League to other organizations, and they're wrong. There is nothing that should disqualify you from doing this. In fact, the gratitude we should feel for you putting yourself out there yet again because you want to serve this nation that still struggles to make real on the promise of equal justice under the law, the promise of liberty and justice for all, and the hope that we can become, as John Lewis so eloquently said, a more beloved country. So my friend, my partner, the partner of people on both sides of the aisle that have helped to make this nation more just, I am so grateful for you. And I want to ask you as your last inquisitor, for the record of the United States of America, for history, for those that may come on a generation from now, want to read about this hallowed and historic committee, is there anything you would like to say in your final remarks?
Thank you so much, Senator. I'm humbled. I think many people struggle to figure out what their calling is, and I feel blessed that I figured out what my calling is at an incredibly young age. And I've proceeded through life with a kind of laser focus on using the opportunities that I have been given to give back to those less fortunate. I feel blessed to wake up, to do work each and every day that allows me to do just that, to stand up for our nation's most vulnerable communities, to close those gaps between the haves and the have-nots. I do this work with my son in mind often. I think about him, a young Black teen, and the future that lies ahead for him. And my hope is that the work I do every day helps to tear down a wall here or a wall there that might make the path a little easier for him and for all kids like him. I'm humbled and I'm humbled to be sitting in this chair. And I am hopeful that the Senate will give me the opportunity to serve and to work alongside Attorney General Garland to help make real the promise of equal justice under law for all. Thank you very much, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, can I just submit something for the record? Because I've had my staff fact-checking. It was stated that Vinita Gupta and Attorney General Holder have stated that the shooting of Darren Wilson was justified, or Darren Wilson was justified in shooting Michael Brown, excuse me. We have been able to find no such statements from Vinita Gupta and from former Attorney General Holder. And this was used in the context of a larger questioning about, I think there was an absolutist term used that the nominee has consistently questioned. That absolutism is not true. And so at a time in America where there is an understanding that there is often the use of force, particularly, not just against African Americans, but particularly against African Americans, the unjustified use of force, I think she is more than qualified to look at the facts of a case and discern. And she would not have the endorsements of, because she said it was stated that police officers should be afraid. Well, she would not have the endorsements of so many groups, the Major Chiefs Association, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, if what was said in this hearing was in any way correct. law enforcement, as well as civil rights activists, understand that there needs to be a healing in this country where the truth and due process prevail. And her record is a clear indication that she will be that kind of leader, and I wanted to correct those things for the record. And again, my staff has been trying to fact check the assertions. If I'm wrong, I apologize to the center, and I asked to see those quotes, but to us, those things were not said.
For the sake of clarity, I invite you to join with our staff and to deliver whatever evidence you have of your position, and invite the minority as well if they have any information which backs up statements made on that subject. So the record is open for that purpose, and I'll go at this point. I don't believe there are any further questions of the witnesses. So before I adjourn the hearings, I want to enter a number of letters into the record and make a few logistical notes. Both nominees enjoy support from individuals, organizations across the spectrum, a reflection of their work experience, their integrity, independence, and commitment to executing the law. And without objection, I'll introduce into the record letters of support from law enforcement, civil rights, current and former state attorneys general, bipartisan group of former Justice Department officials, corporate leaders, and otherwise. Questions for the record will be due to the nominees 1 week from today, on Wednesday, April 21st by 5 p.m., and the record will remain open until that time for submission of letters and similar materials. And with that, if there's nothing further, this hearing stands adjourned. I thank the nominees for their patience and participation.